The focus of today's event is one talking about the Developing Leaders report that has happened with around 70 plus organizations. Along with that, as the flow of the event, we will be focusing on starting with understanding what was the methodology, what were some demographics of people engaged in the process, after which we will have focus on the three big insights that have come up from the report, and from there on we'll move to hearing comments from our partner organizations from A.T. Chandra Foundation and Satwa who are present here. And after which there'll be some space around last 10 to 15 minutes for some comments, reflections from all of you, and some conversations to flow to understand where all of us are with the report. That's the broad flow. So once again, thank you everyone for being here, and grateful to all of you and all our partners who've supported us in making this happen. On the screen, I am just going to share the report for everybody's reference. So, presenting to all of you for the first time in front of everyone the Developing Leaders report. I request others who are not talking, if you could mute yourself, it will help others. So the Developing Leaders report has happened in collaboration with A.T. Chandra Foundation and Satwa Consulting. Both our partners have supported us in different capacities, and we'll be hearing a little bit more about them through the event to understand how the whole report panned out. Going to directly to how this report started off. For us, with the pandemic happening and with the amount of focus on capacity building work that had happened in the previous years, there have been some really great reports, there have been great conversation starters previously in the sector. From there to now, where have we reached as a sector on capacity building, leadership building? And after the pandemic specifically, when we've seen so many effects happen internally on all of us, so where are we as a sector and what are the needs and challenges in the organization? Some of these questions led us to start with this report, and as we moved through the report, we focused on few methodologies to make sure we're able to capture understanding from the partners and participants in different ways. So we focused on individual interviews, one-on-one qualitative conversations over calls. We had 70 surveys where participants filled in specific questions on online forms. We had focus group discussions on three specific thematics where it was a dialogue form for people to dialogue, understand, and jam over questions and agreements and disagreements on various aspects of the questions for the report, and some secondary data and report articles. So, comprising of all of this is what the report brings out, the deep insights that have emerged from this whole process. Moving to the demographics of the people who responded to the survey, we've had 60% of the people, 60% of males who've responded, and around 40% of female members who've responded. Age-wise, when we looked at the respondents, there was 40% 70% of the respondents were above the age of 40, and then there was a mix of people from 30 to 39, and some even younger than that, and some older than 50. The participants of the who were respondents in the process comprised of largely the founders and CEOs of organizations to understand what happens and what are the questions on leadership they face for themselves and in the organization, to look at the leadership bandwidth in the organization. Most of the organizations were more than 10 years old. Some again were a little younger and some older than that as well. 70% of these organizations were of team size less than 50 people, and 45% of these organizations have annual budget over 3 crores, and which means mostly what we are talking about is medium-sized organizations and some a little larger. 80% of these organizations were NGOs. We did reach out to CBOs, People's Movement, and consulting organizations, but the responses from there were very limited. Geographically, a lot of the respondents were organizations who engage in rural and semi-urban focus areas, along with also focus on tribal areas. There was the remaining proportion of the organizations include urban areas as well. Close to one fourth of the respondents were from corporate background and then had moved to social space. And there are some others who were born, who started their career and journey through the social space and continued through this. And overall, when we looked at what are some of the biggest challenges on leadership that come up for organization, we found, of course, funding and scaling being the top two. But the third most important after funding and scaling for organization was absence of leadership beyond leaders themselves. So these were the top three concerns that we heard through the survey results, through the conversations and focus group discussions from our respondents. So just a little bit of the demographics and methodology to make sense of where the report is coming from, who are the people who are engaged, through whom the data is coming. And now when we go to insights, we know why these insights came up based on the people who were engaged. So I'll pass it from here to Abhishek to take us through the insights and take the event forward.
Thank you, Kejal. And also hello to Minu and Poonam, who I shall be introducing in a bit right after we've shared some of the insights. So the big question that was for the report's main query was what's really happening with leadership development. We already had a few reports on top of which we were building. And we came up with three key insights or three key realizations. They're intuitive, but now validated by data. And what I'll be sharing are the nuances of these three. Uh, the first insight that came was what we call the leader's dilemma. Uh, we had earlier called it the leader's trap because we also had some leaders who felt trapped by this particular dilemma, but we finally figured that maybe leaders are choosing to stay in dilemma. So the essence of this leadership dilemma or the leader's dilemma is a tug between being caught into day-to-day operations and visioning. Now, we saw that leaders are the most contested territory of any organization. Everybody wants to talk to leaders. We're in a celebrate the leaders culture. Leaders are evangelizing, running operations, connecting to vision, all at the same time. And what we heard was that in the minds of leaders, there is an ideal thing, an ideal way of leadership that they would like to do. And that we saw as this cycle where they would start with a vision, raise resources for the vision, build the organization that delivers the vision, and then focus on operations, reconnecting to the vision time to time and keeping it alive. So the ideal journey of a leader should be this whole cycle. Right? And we heard leaders saying we would like to go in this way. We would like to keep revisiting the vision. What happens though is that in this cycle, it starts with visioning, you get the resources, you build the first initial organization, the 1.0. And then when operations come, it's a sticky place. It's a place where you get so stuck in day-to-day operations that the time to go back to the vision gets really reduced. Just merely running operations, which is setting processes, program activities, and then raising resources just to sustain, right? And scale up the old vision, not necessarily a new vision, gets leaders really stuck. When we spoke to leaders, we found all of them in different ways saying that they're struggling with managing priorities, or even if they want to prioritize vision, the short-term things come and take up their time and energy, and so on. Uh, this is now also important because leaders set the tone and the pace of the organization as a whole. What the leader does today, the organization also copies and maybe does tomorrow, right? And the idea that the leader is occupied not in visioning, but so much more in operations also moves the organization into an operational focus. The short-term focus then in turn means that leaders don't have the capacity to have people who they can delegate things to. They're constantly firefighting, and because they don't have people, they themselves get even more stuck. So it's almost like operations felt like a trap in which leaders are very deeply stuck in. At the long run, it is also costing leaders their mental health, burnout issues, and really not being able to re-energize the vision. Ultimately, the founder, the person who's leading, is the person who takes something from 0 to 1, as Peter Thiel calls it, right? The innovator. And innovators thrive on vision. Not being able to connect to visions is a serious challenge. And really, each time the leader has to pull away from operations to focus on vision. And really, the dilemma on a day-to-day basis where should I give energy, operations, or vision. And just because of its urgency and for its day-to-day survival, operations seems to keep winning. Leaders keep saying they would like to build organizations, they would like to build culture, they would like to build capacity someday, but the day doesn't arrive as easily. Move to the second insight, and it's linked to the first one in some ways, perhaps, that uh, the social space and the corporate space are seen as two very different spaces. Now, a lot of us and a lot of survey respondents also came from the corporate space. So one could argue that people are people. One could argue that goals are goals, outcomes have to be achieved, and we have to do what it takes. We found, though, that when seen from the social sector side, the corporate world is seen as a different world. And this is a matter of perception. So here it's not really, we are not putting a claim on reality that it is so, but we are sharing a perception that we found and heard at multiple places in the social space. And the nature of this two world perception was that there is a corporate world and there is us. And this is how it's different. We come into this sector for a cause. The corporate sector is driven by profits. Because we are driven by our own passions, we need autonomy. We need the freedom to do what we want to do. Because the corporate is focused on profits, it has to make everybody fall in line. Because we are passionate and because our work is very contextual, we are more relationship oriented, we are more fluid, there is much more autonomy, and we're more caring. Whereas in the corporate, because it's the results first, there seems to be, or at least it's perceived as lesser autonomy, lesser ownership, and much more execution focus. Get your results. Now, this perception as a whole also comes from the fact that a whole set of survey participants have never experienced the corporate world. And when they look at this world, there is a sense of skepticism. There's a sense of skepticism about what is coming out from the corporate world, particularly in terms of leadership and capacity building. The idea that these business schools and corporates teaching us about leadership is seen with skepticism. It is like they will not really understand us. Our contexts are very, very unique, and we know our beneficiaries, we know our issues, we know what that leadership looks like. Anything that is coming out of the corporate boardrooms or out of management academia doesn't really apply locally to us. And therefore, there is a subtle resistance, unless pushed by the donors, unless pushed by a group of peers, unless there is a financial incentive or there is something in terms of a new network to be gained. Deeply, there is a feeling with many people that these are not homegrown solutions. These are solutions coming from outside. The final insight is the lack of integrated work. So a lot of capacity building and culture work has to do with trust, and people trust those closest to them. So we are seeing that founders trust their board, they trust themselves, their inner teams, and very often the source of advice on how to do organization building comes from these immediate sources. It's just an informal way of getting a sense of what to do and then going about doing it. There's also a wide and vibrant pro bono system around the not-for-profit space where there are a lot of people coming and doing pro bono workshops or coaching and one-off activities. So typically we saw that capacity building is a combination of relying on your inner circle very closely and then looking at whatever is available and kind of going with that. What is not happening because this is this reliance on this informal sources and free expertise, that combination of that, there's never really a long-term focused approach on building culture, building capacity. Nothing in a 3 to 5 year range, nothing with a long-term strategic vision for learning and development. So there's a skepticism which is coming from, will external experts understand us, even because our board understands us best, I know my context the best. So really the formal capacity building work then is ad hoc, it is piecemeal. It's not really taken on as a long-term strategic priority, which in turn means that it does not deliver the results as well because it's not approached formally. And because that doesn't happen, the skepticism also continues. So it's almost like a self-reinforcing loop. All these three insights are reinforcing each other also. They do not understand us. Those solutions do not apply to us. So we'll continue doing our thing. In doing our thing, we do not build the organization. We get busier doing that. We do not have the capacity or the space to breathe. And therefore, we don't build organizations. Therefore, organizations do not scale, do not raise funds, and do not really solve the problems of so many people in our country. So I think that's kind of the heart of what we discovered in our research, reinforcing loops which are all interlocking with each other and almost like a gridlock of sorts, which is held in place by a couple of worldviews, couple of assumptions. Uh, Going to our own take on what do we do about it, I'll come towards the end of it saying what did we come up as answers, what did we hear also as for possible answers. But before that, we have two experts with us in the room who we thought we'll invite to reflect back with their experiences also and with the content of the report. So I want to begin with Poonam first. Poonam comes from A.T. Chandra Foundation. This survey and report was originated with a conversation with A.T. Chandra, who said, let's look at what's really going on. A.T. Chandra Foundation is focused on capacity building of individuals, organizations, and the ecosystem as a whole. Prior to this, Poonam was Unlimited India, which also Blue Ribbon was an investee of at some stage. And she was focusing on monitoring and evaluation. She's also worked with Adhyan, a social enterprise working with schools. She focused on the scale up of the school evaluation program to 300 plus schools pan India, 15 plus years of corporate and social experience, large conglomerates to social startups. So bringing all that together, Poonam, welcome. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Over to you for any observations, questions, thoughts that come to you.
Thank you so much, Abhishek, for the introduction and for doing this research work for all of us to understand where we are in the sector, while there is a lot of data that is available. So primarily our purpose of, funding this kind of report was to really, like Kajal highlighted in the beginning, is understand what are the challenges, that the sector is facing when it comes to developing the leaders within the organization. Now, we generally have a lot of, broadcasting support that we offer to NGOs, right? I mean, there are a lot of programs available, but may not be really customized. And I believe, and we at the foundation believe that, times are changing, of course, with pandemic, but also because, NGOs are very dynamic. And so is the work that we do in the sector. So it's not like, what is, relevant a decade ago, 5 years back is, relevant today. So we need to constantly adapt, to the changing needs of the leaders and the changing needs of the sector. And hence this kind of, research report or, insights are very useful to understand what the challenges of the leader are. And also to really understand, which I think Abhishek really beautifully brought about, is, what is the mindset and attitude with which that leaders are now seeing the capacity building of the organization. Because pandemic really put everybody in a very stressful position, right? I mean, we didn't have reserves, we didn't have corpus, we didn't have, any means to sustainability. We were literally, financially stretched. But one is financial resilience, that is very critical for the success of the organization, but also is, long-term sustainability. And people are a very core part of that, long-term sustainability. So for us to really understand what are organizations doing to, to invest in people and their, building resilience, how are they really looking at it? So for us, this was very important to do and identify. So good insights, for all of us to understand. So what I really wanted to add from our experience, working at the foundation, we do support a lot of learning and development programs in the sector. Where there are a lot of courses that are offered to professionals for developing their leadership or fundraising skills or people practices, because we see there's an emerging need that is identified by the NGO leaders, but also we need to develop a pipeline of service providers who can offer and meet those needs of the NGOs. And it's important to identify especially what are the current needs and the future needs of the NGOs when it comes to organization building. While leadership is the central piece, to the organization, functioning, operations, and sustenance, we believe that it's very important to look at organization holistically. So we really encourage and ask all our partner NGOs and generally promote assessing what are your current organizational needs. And we're very good at programmatic needs assessment, right? We know exactly why we are doing what programs. We exactly know why the intervention works. We exactly know how to scale up. But if the same questions are asked in the context of the organization, I see a lot of blind spots. And that's come. And it's not generally we think that the early the non-mature organizations, or let's say the early organizations, who are 1 to 3 years old, are the ones who struggle with it. No, let me break that myth. Even the most mature organizations that we work with are, let's say, 8 to 10 years old in the system, face the similar challenges, right? So our approach is to really, and we believe it's a key enabler for organization to look at sustainability, is to really understand your current and future needs, and from the lens of leadership, because we are talking about it, it's very important. And what happens is, generally in case of leadership, we've seen in pandemic, what I had seen personally, that due to unfortunate situations, we lost a lot of leaders. And so, the second in line just had to rise up to the occasion and take on the reins of the organization without any training, without any support, without any inputs. That really put everybody in a fixed situation and undesirable, right, for anybody in the organization. So I felt like, and there were some service providers that I know stepped up and supported those second in line to provide the relevant support, give them the right kind of inputs that makes this transition much more easier. But I think it's very important for us to step back before we step into that situation, and really understand how can we avoid getting into an emergency transition, and rather plan for a successful transition in the organization. And I think for that, it's very important that leaders understand and acknowledge that it's important to share, for the lack of a better word, power structure in the organization. So I think it's very important to be more planned in that direction, rather than being really put into that situation. And I think, and more I have seen that there are very good tools developed and designed by OCAT. There is one organizational capacity assessment tool. So Wisdom Tree, I'm sure Satwa has good organizational assessment tools. So it's very important to just reflect, step back, and look at where we are as an organization, and of course leadership at the center of it. I think second piece that I would really like to talk about is, while we identify what is the current and future needs of the organization building, what really is the culture for development, right? And whether it's development of leadership or development of any other domains of the organization. But if we talk from the leadership, what is the kind of processes, systems, practices that we have in the organization that enables that culture to institutionalize? Because cultures doesn't get built over overnight. It takes a lot of engagement from every stakeholder to institutionalize that culture, and especially when we talk about leadership. Now, being in the funding side of things, and I completely understand that NGOs are pushed and challenged to focus more on programs than organization building. So I know that it's not an easy path. Completely, that more and more investment of people, resources of the organization is into program success or program management. But I think it's very important to again build that culture that really helps them focus on building the organizational leadership. So what I have seen, and I think everybody will vouch for it, right, that we are very good at programmatic leadership. We are very good at domain leadership, right? Whatever domain we are. But I think really stepping up from that to saying, what does it really mean to take organizational leadership as a priority is very important. Now, interestingly, we all understand the need because the Brisbane report that was launched in, I think, 2017, the bench at Indian NGOs, that talks about it. 97% of the NGOs that were surveyed, and this is approximately 200 plus NGOs surveyed, the leaders said that, leadership is a priority. but none of the practices in the organization reflect that priority. So while we acknowledge and understand, there's a huge gap in that, understanding and action. So I think it's very, very important to bridge that gap uh, in a timely manner, uh, for the success of the organization. And interestingly, because I interact with a lot of NGOs, I also interact with peers from the funding community. I think more and more, funding organizations are trust organizations that has a good diverse set of leaders in the organization, that enables decision making, which is decentralized, right? So I think if there is a huge dependence on one single leader in any organization, that does not build the trust and the confidence for the funding community. And I think to break that cycle, one needs to really start looking at how to delegate decision making, how to identify that second tier in the organization, how to plan to provide the right kind of opportunities to the second in line in the organization, and how do we really engage them in the change management, so they are not just the program leaders or domain leaders, but an integral part of the institution. And I think I completely understand that two things that really becomes a deterrent in this process, right? One is, you know, we lack the ability, and I think most organizations that I've read and met and experienced, that we really are challenged with recruiting, retaining, the right kind of talent in the sector, and also specifically more, I think importantly, transitioning, how to enable the second in line to transition to the leadership position. I think that's a real challenge. And I think the other challenge I think we've seen, and is the lack of resources, more financial resources to allocate budgets to provide these kind of opportunities. But I would encourage everybody, and from my learnings and from my experience, I have seen that more and more NGOs have started to ask for these kind of support from their funders, and calling it out that it's important for us to build this sustainability in the organization, and hence require the right kind of funds, and not only limit yourself to funders, but definitely reach out to funders that are supporting your programs, but also your board members. How do you engage them more critically? How do you engage them in the planning of this leadership development? How do you engage your friends and supporters and influencers of the organization to provide you the right kind of inputs? So I think it's very important to really identify a right ecosystem that will allow for this change management of leadership development in your organization to happen. So I think, yeah, those were my two bits that I thought are very important for us to think upon while we really look at planning for the organizational leadership development. So I think with this, I'd like to give it back to Abhishek.
Thank you, Poonam. This is all totally like panel discussion material, because there's so much that you shared in this short sharing. You touched on power, decentralization, culture, sustainability. All of those are such rich threads. And I think I am taking away that as we also transition to millennials and Gen Z coming in, I think the need for decentralization, the need for well-being, the need for a culture that lets people thrive, we're seeing that need becoming even more salient. And definitely, like you said, each of these is a critical thing, including the ecosystem building. Great. So we have Meenu next, and Meenu also comes from the development sector. She's a senior engagement manager at Satwa. Satwa is an organization most of us would know in the development sector as well. She's worked extensively on capacity building of NGOs to help them scale up, multiply their impact. She anchors work around capability building of medium-sized and small NGOs within Satwa. She comes from an engineering background with a degree in IRMA, and she entered the development sector as a consultant in the Coconut Development Board, setting up farmer producer organizations. So, Meenu, these are the organizations that you would probably have worked with. So it would be interesting to hear what you had to say, and also gratitude for the input Satwa gave us to make this report more robust.
Thank you so much, Abhishek, for inviting me for the session and the great introduction. And first of all, congratulations for launching this report. I think much needed, and A.T. Chandra having kind of supported in this report launch. So I think I kind of wanted to bring in a perspective of overall capacity building for NGOs, given that that's a space that I extensively work in, and leadership really being the core of it, right? Because I honestly feel any capacity building that you do within an organization cannot strive and sustain without leadership, because then it's just something you set up, the moment you leave, you don't know, like a boomerang, it goes back. So it's extremely critical for leadership to be like the core and the center of capacity building. So interestingly, I think we've been working a lot on really trying to influence funding for the aspirational districts. So we've been working with CSRs, working with the government, talking about how only of all the CSR funds, 2% roughly goes to the aspirational districts. So while we were having the conversation trying to push and influence funds into the aspirational districts, we also interestingly had conversations with nonprofits, right? And the question came in that while we really kind of try and bring in funds, but how do we look at the nonprofits and their capability of being able to utilize the funds, being able to really implement the programs with a lot of efficiency. Also, given that a lot of nonprofits in these districts were like small, medium nonprofits, right? And we see that all this kind of bring in a conversation around capability building and how important that is, right? And it's going to be extremely, extremely critical, the capability building of nonprofits as an important topic for us to look at in the coming years, right? If we really need to look at development ecosystem overall, right? One is the number of NGOs that are there today, right, within the ecosystem. So a Bain report a couple of years back say there are already 31 lakh or more NGOs in the ecosystem. So what differentiates you today, right? How would a donor decide where should I actually invest funds, right? So what will differentiate you today as an organization? Very critical question. Second, like I mentioned, funders, there is a part where a lot of funders are now saying, okay, let's see, where should we invest money? ATCF coming in and like the conversations we are having, right? So there is a lot of funds that people are trying to mobilize, right? Are we ready to effectively use these funds? The second probably question to answer. And third one, I think all of you mentioned, post-COVID, I think the scenario has changed. There's a lot of realization about the need for building capability of organization, right? And the foundation of the organization, which means systems, right? Which support our core, financial resilience, leadership. These are the things, if we actually look back and reflect, right? These are the things that kept us going in the last couple of years. So given all these scenario, I think it has become increasingly important that we look at capability building for nonprofits, right? And some of the trends that we are observing from our side also, like donors are today looking, while program remains a focus, increasingly more and more donors are evaluating nonprofits based on capabilities. So they are asking a very, very relevant question. What are your core capabilities, right? We understand you're brilliant with programs, but what are your core capabilities? They're asking for data. So what database reporting is becoming increasingly important. Lot of conversations around entire capability, people willing to even fund capability, right? So that we can see, while I wouldn't say it's still is at what we would like it to be, but we can see inclination and interest among donors to put in money for capability building as well. So that's what is happening on one side, right? But I think at the same time, it's important for us to be cognizant about what's happening on the other side. Like I said, definitely, I think we need to mobilize more resources and more people to talk about capability building. Second is what exists today, right? There are a lot of mainstream capability building programs that exist, but if we look at it, many of them still are catering to, I would say, what would really fit the larger, larger nonprofits, right? Even something as simple as language, right? Do we have today programs that are really looking at regional languages, right? Really suiting the requirements of smaller nonprofits? I'm not very sure about that, right? Third, I would say the need for building core capabilities, right? Which would be like HR, finance, leadership, and so on at an affordable cost. So, affordable quality programs, are they really available? And the customizable programs, right? You spoke about that. A lot of programs today stand alone, right? It's not integrated. And I think I also mentioned this to Kajal. The integrated approach to me is extremely, extremely critical, right? Bringing in, because nothing in an organization stands alone. Leadership, culture, systems, process, everything come together. So these are all the challenges. And I think these are challenges also rightly highlighted in your insights as well. And it's also something that we are observing, right? So within Satwa, we are very clear that hence, whatever we look at in terms of capacity building needs to, one, be not a single way approach, right? We require a multi-leveled approach. So you might have to do webinars, you might have to do hand-holding customized training, you might require a portal, you might require a call center, you might require n different things. So there is no probably a single approach to capacity building. We will have to look at a multi-level approach. We will have to keep in mind the interest of the small medium organization, because they form the bulk of the nonprofit that we're talking about. So regional languages, yes, we'll have to kind of see how that comes into play. Third, like I mentioned, being able to provide shared services, core services at a reasonable kind of affordable value, but quality services, again, right, is going to be important. And for all this to happen, not a single organization can do anything. This needs to be like an ecosystem level play where we bring in partnerships, where we bring in experts, we bring in service providers, we bring in funders like A.T. Chandra, people who really believe in this cause together. And nonprofits play a huge role in it, right? Until we have the champions, until we have leaders, until we have few people who are really taking this to the next level, I think it's slightly difficult for some organization to see value in it, right? So I think one interesting fact is it's extremely difficult for people to see value in OD because it's long term, right? And hence, if we don't have champions who are really demonstrating this, getting other organizations to follow the suit will be slightly difficult, yeah? And I just want to end this by saying that, going back to the leadership piece, right? Like I started this with, without leadership, so for us to start something like this, we require leaders. For us to make sure this change management happens in the ecosystem within the organization, we require leaders. If we need to sustain this in an ongoing manner, we require leaders, right? So anything we have to do in this space has to start with leaders. And hence, I think leadership program is definitely critical. So I've also seen a lot of capability program talk about process systems, but might not focus on people. It's also because people part is slightly tricky. It's not as simple as it is, right? And it is, while could be a lot of modules, it's a lot of mindset change. And bringing that sort of a mindset culture change is tricky, honestly, and also requires effort over a period of time. But hoping to really see some great changes here. I mean, again, with this report, I'm also looking forward for some wonderful programs kind of coming up, and really we being able to deliver that sort of value to nonprofits, right? I'm sure everybody's aware this is the much required need of the hour. So really looking forward to see this going forward in action. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you so much for the people who have joined the session as well.
Thank you, Meenu. And yeah, so many points there also. Again, panel discussion, conversation worthy. But like you said, the time to build more core capabilities, and particularly across language. Also, shout out to a lot of our friends here. You know who you are. Good to see the parivar, the family, the friends here. So hello everyone, including some elders here as well. So just want to send out regards to them. So, basis the report and also these conversations, we came up with a program which incorporated much of these recommendations. It's called, and I wanted to take a few minutes just to share about developing leaders and designing cultures. So we said that, like Meenu said, shared also that it's not only developing leaders but designing cultures that is key. How do you do that? So really moving from one leader to building a culture in an organization which is of learning, of leadership. And really at Wisdom Tree, we want this sector to thrive. We want the sector to be a happy place, a thriving place, a place of well-being, a place where people really enjoy the sacred work that they're doing, a place where they're able to go beyond themselves. That's really what we're trying to do. And with DLDC, we're really trying to build the organization health and leadership across the organization. Uh, all these insights of the report are incorporated here. So instead of a one-off intervention, we're doing a 9-month journey. Instead of just doing it as a leadership program, we're doing it customized to the organizations that are a part of it. So working closely with the organizations, and solutions are not standardized. They're really in a journey where we work with the organizational and like Minu shared, not one size, not only labs, not only webinars, not only coaching, but a blended approach, not only with the leader, but the leader plus one person. Uh, the 9-month journey has an opening lab, a 4-day lab. It has coaching calls through the journey. It has an organization culture circle where we go and work with the organization, and it has a closing lab. Uh, and throughout this, there's a project which will really be the project of transforming the organization's culture. And we'll be working with the organizations on transforming their culture through this program. So that's our intent. DLDC is a bilingual program. So we are starting to take our first steps in moving from a pure English to a multilingual program, and trying to reach out to organizations that come from a similar geography, similar sector as well, so that there'll be a lot more cross learning. We've had funders who are willing to support organizations who want to do this, and we have organizations who are also keen to join in. If your organization is keen, or you know some organizations that will benefit from BLDC, please do spread the word and reach out to us. It'll definitely be a promising journey, a 9-month journey that will birth a new organization. That's our commitment to as a part of DLDC. Great. So I think just to honor the time also, and to honor that we said that we do a 45-minute session, I'm going to bring this session to a close in time. But what we propose to do is to leave the floor, the space open after our closing, and maybe some Q&A, some charcha. Jaise, you can imagine that chai and samosas are served outside the room, and we're all going out and having our chai and having our snack. और उधर थोड़ी बहुत चर्चा के बगैर फिर इवेंट में मजा नहीं आता है अगर वो इनफॉर्मल चर्चा ना हो रही हो तो. So I wanted to just take this time and invite people into the informal space as well. And I want to close with just thanking our panelists, Poonam and Meenu, both for being here and also for shaping this report with their input. Several people in the sector actually contributed, and what comes out for the report is also how collaborative we are as a sector to really build knowledge, to share knowledge. So I want to just acknowledge that all the organizations who responded to the survey in these busy times to respond to surveys, show up for focus group discussions, to be interviewed. So a lot of that. And participants here, thank you for showing up, and hope this was valuable. Hope these are pointers. The report will be available for download. It contains recommendations for various groups, for service providers, for donors, for leaders, for the organizations themselves, and we're sure those recommendations shall help in the way that they proceed.